Well, good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson tonight. This morning, a gunman opened fire on a group of Republicans practicing for the annual congressional baseball game, a charity. The shooter, who was a man called James Hodgkinson, was an enthusiastic progressive and a Bernie Sanders supporter who appears to have done this for ideological reasons. Before opening fire, Hodgkinson asked whether the baseball players were Democrats or Republicans. At this point, the only death is the shooter himself, but 5 other people were wounded badly in some cases. 2 Capitol Hill police officers, a Hill staffer, a lobbyist, and the House Majority Whip, Steve Scalise of Louisiana. Mr. Scalise remains in grave condition tonight in a Washington hospital. There are reports that the president will be visiting his bedside sometime this evening. We'll keep you updated on that. But this morning, in a depressingly familiar ritual, journalists and politicians wasted no time trying to score political points from the shootings. Blogger and Twitter buffoon David Frum may have been the quickest to the scene. As the rest of the country was waking up to the horrifying news of what had happened, Frum was busy writing his sermon. Quote, Virginia, no background checks, no licensing, no registration, no permit required for concealing of carried long guns, open carry long guns, and handguns. Well, it'd be funny if it wasn't so gross and absurd. A concealed carry permit for a rifle? What does that even look like? And by the way, Virginia does require a background check to buy a gun. But Frum was not alone. In a morning statement, Virginia Governor Terry McAuliffe claimed that 93 million people die every single day in this country thanks to gun violence. 93 million, more than a third of the country murdered every day of the calendar year. The governor said that multiple times. This is what happens, of course, when ignorant liberals talk about firearms, but it misses the point anyway. What happened today isn't horrifying because it was gun violence. It's horrifying because it was political violence, and therefore it threatens the basic stability of our country. That's why shooting a congressman for his party affiliation is a bigger deal than killing a man in a bar because he hit on your wife. They're both bad and immoral, but only one could potentially lead to civil war. Some on the hard left understand this, and that's why they support it, because political violence could lead to the dissolution of a country they despise, this country. Huffington Post writer Jesse Benn tweeted his approval of the Scalise shooting, quote, the world would be a better place without him, end of story. Benn's only criticism of the attack was its limited scale, quote, for violent resistance to work, it'd need to be organized. Individual acts can be understandable, but likely counterproductive or ineffective. Whoa. On the other side of the divide, some are looking to blame the media or Bernie Sanders for the shooting. It's an understandable temptation, maybe, but it's best resisted. The only person directly responsible for what happened today is the man who pulled the trigger. That said, there are some lessons we might be able to learn from what happened this morning. One is that in this volatile moment, and it is volatile, people with megaphones ought to be responsible about what they say. That means never excusing political violence under any circumstances. That means condemning shootings like this, but it also means riots, assaults, occupations, threats, any other attempt to achieve political goals through force ought to be condemned. Being responsible also means being intellectually honest and not implying you know more than you actually do know. If you believe, for example, that Russia had improper involvement in last fall's election, that's fine. Make your case. But don't accuse your political opponents of treason unless you have hard evidence that they committed treason. It seems obvious, but there are big ratings in conspiracy theories these days, and some can't resist. They should resist. Above all, though, don't dehumanize your political opponents. The people who disagree with you are still people. Politics is not a referendum on virtue. It is not a holy war. It's a debate about how best to run the country. Reasonable people can disagree on that. They have for hundreds of years. The other side isn't evil. They are wrong. More than anything, they are our fellow Americans, kin to us, and that means far more than any differing view on Obamacare or marginal tax rates or even Russia. If you keep that in mind, you won't lose your decency. Congressman Mo Brooks represents the state of Alabama. He was an eyewitness to today's attack, right in the middle of it, and he joins us now. Congressman Brooks, thank you for coming on tonight. So set the scene for us. You were practicing, and then what happened?
Well, I was on the third base side of home plate. We had a batting cage, which has a cover on it to prevent foul balls from leaving the field. And I was swinging 2 or 3 bats to warm up. I was on deck. Congressman Rodney Davis was actually hitting. A fellow by the name of Will Batson, who's from the Tennessee Valley, my congressional district, graduated from University of North Alabama, was pitching on the mound. And all of a sudden I hear this loud explosion, a bang. First I thought it was a car backfire or something of that nature. Right. Turned around and then I saw the gun. It was a rifle. I saw the barrel. It was pretty close to the chain link fence, shooting through the holes in the chain link fence. At the time, the shooter was aiming towards shortstop, second base, right field. And it occurred to me that if I could see him, he could see me if he shifted his focus a little bit to his right. That prompted me to realize I was not, I had a baseball bat. That wasn't going to be very good against a rifle.
No.
And I needed to find some kind of cover, so I ran around the batting cage and face first into the ground on the first base side of the batting cage, where he couldn't see me, but all I had was a plastic shield around the bottom of the batting cage that was preventing him from seeing me.
So how long did this go on?
I thought it was 3 to 5 minutes, but I've seen video that is at least 6 minutes. That suggests to me that the entire event was probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 6 to 10 minutes. The number of shots fired, at least 50, maybe as many as 100. I'm sure we'll get a report. Things are happening so fast when you're in that kind of environment. It's very difficult to accurately calculate the passage of time or to keep track of the number of bullets. At some point, there are about 3 or 4 of us lying on the ground near home plate on the first base side of that batting cage where he can't see us, but it's plastic he can shoot through. And it occurred to me, and I imagine it occurred to some of the others, that we would not be in a very good position if the shooter walked around the third base dugout towards home plate. He's on the outside of the fencing. And we'd be lying on the ground with absolutely no defense, 10 to 15 feet away from a guy with a rifle. So we made the collective decision to sprint into the first base dugout. Fortunately, it's recessed a foot and a half, 2 feet. And we were diving in that dugout just as fast as we could. When I got down there, I didn't even remember that it was Jeff Flake's next to me. I was at the far end of the dugout. I was here. Jeff Flake was here. Zach, who got shot, was next to Jeff. And then Coach Roger Williams from Texas, also a congressman, was on his other side. And I said, Zach, you're hit. And, you've been young, teenager, 20s. We didn't think we're kind of immortal. And he said, oh, it's no big deal. And I'm going, dude, you've been shot. This is a big deal.
Where was he shot, Congressman?
He was shot in the calf. Apparently the bullet had gone all the way through and he was bleeding. And so I took off my belt and said, look, you've got to have a tourniquet. Reached over there in that direction with the belt. I don't remember, quite frankly, if Jeff took it from me and gave it to Zach, but eventually with the 3 of us, it got placed on his leg near his knee, and later on, after everything was over with, it looked like he was still wearing that belt to provide a tourniquet to help minimize the blood loss.
That is just remarkable. And very quickly, where was Congressman Scalise during all this?
Well, when I ran to get around behind the batting cage, first thing I heard, simultaneous with the first half dozen shots, taking 2 or 3 seconds, was active shooter, bam, bam, bam. Steve Scalise yelled something. I don't know if it was shooter or I'm hit, but I recognized his voice in that chaos. And then as I'm running around the batting cage, I see Steve on the ground in the second base position on the infield dirt, trying to pull himself on the ground towards right field. And of course, there's not much we can do when all we have are baseball bats and gloves and baseballs, and we're trying to secure ourselves. Fortunately, the shooter did not seem to shoot anymore at Steve Scalise, although he did hit one person, Matt, by a number of times. And one of the other startling moments is I'm on the ground. We've got the tourniquet on Zach. I'm right next to the exit to the dugout where there's only one entrance and exit. We've got a 10-foot fence all the way around this place. And if the shooter gets to that exit, we're all boxed in with no place to go. And I'm lying on the ground eating dugout dirt along with some of my comrades. And all of a sudden, bam, bam, bam. And it was I'm thinking, oh my goodness, another shooter. I look up, and it was a Capitol Police officer by the name of David Bailey. And he was using the cinder block dugout as a defensive position. And it was a tremendous feeling of joy.
Yes.
To see a good guy shooting back. It seemed like it took forever to engage, but once the engagement took place, our Capitol Police officers were excellent. They were heroic. And if they had not been there, it could have been a massacre because we were pinned inside what was basically a 10-foot fence.
I cannot believe you're a U.S. congressman telling me this story, and it's real. The whole thing is totally shocking, even now, all these hours later. Congressman, thank you for your account of that. It's amazing.
Thank you, Tucker.